The light on the stage was soft that night, just a single beam cutting through the smoke, resting on a woman whose voice could shake a room to its bones. Before anyone knew her name, people felt her. A sound that rose straight out of the church, raw and trembling with truth, the kind that made you close your eyes because it reached places you didn't know were still open. Most folks remember the movie Ray, Jamie Foxx at the piano, the music, the pain, the triumph. But behind that story, behind the man America calls a legend, was a woman whose voice pushed his music into a new world. Her name was Margie Hendrix, and on any given night, Ray Charles himself said no one could touch her. Yet the same fire that made her unforgettable was the fire she could never put out. So we begin with a question, one that lingers long after the spotlight fades. How does a voice strong enough to lift a nation end up silenced at just 38? This is the story of brilliance and breaking, of love and loss, of the woman whose echo still lives in the heart of American music. Heaven must have been quiet the day Margie Hendrix was born, because the world was about to receive a voice that could crack the air like thunder. She came into this life on March 13, 1935, in Statesboro, Georgia, one of those southern towns where church doors stayed open and music spilled into the streets like sunlight. Before she learned how to spell her own name, Margie already understood sound. Not just singing, sound. The breath behind it. The ache inside it. The way a single note could tell the truth faster than any conversation. As a little girl, she would sit on the front steps with a hymnal too big for her hands, humming notes that didn't belong to any song the church had taught her. There was a weight to her voice even then, something deeper than childhood should hold. By the time she could reach the piano keys without standing on her toes, she was already shaping harmonies, hearing the world in colors the rest of us could only feel. The elders at church said, "That child sings like she's been here before." And maybe she had. By her teenage years, Margie wasn't just singing, she was leading the church choir. Picture that, a young girl, barely grown, guiding voices twice her age, lifting them into something bigger than the room they stood in. She didn't bark orders. She didn't hide behind shyness. She simply sang the note she wanted, and everyone followed. That's the kind of presence she carried, quiet but unshakable, like a river that knows exactly where it's going. But Statesboro was small, and Margie was not. She dreamed of a world where music didn't just fill Sunday mornings but entire lifetimes. So at 18, with more courage than money, she left home and boarded a bus to New York City. Her older sister Lula was already there, and together they carved out a small place in that massive, humming city. New York in the early 50s wasn't gentle, especially to a young black woman, but Margie had a kind of determination that made strangers step aside. She found her way to Lamp Records and into the orbit of Jesse Stone, a producer known for shaping the sound of early rhythm and blues. He heard her voice once and knew she wasn't ordinary. Margie recorded her first singles, Good Treatment and Every Time, songs that didn't storm the charts but carried a spark strong enough to keep her name alive in the rooms that mattered. Around this time, the Cookies, a respected girl group working under Jesse Stone, found themselves needing a new member after internal conflict. Margie stepped in without missing a beat. And just like that, her world grew bigger. The Cookies became the go-to background group for Atlantic Records, touring, harmonizing, backing powerhouse voices like Laverne Baker, Chuck Willis, and Ruth Brown. Every stage they touched caught a glimpse of Margie's fire. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but she was the one singers turned toward when they wanted to find the right note. There was something magnetic about her, tough yet tender, disciplined yet wild at heart. On the road, musicians whispered that Margie had that church thunder, the kind of voice that could break through any arrangement. But even as her talent grew, life nudged her toward places she couldn't yet understand. Because somewhere out there, moving across the same musical landscape, was a man whose sound would meet hers like flint striking steel. Ray Charles. And the moment their paths crossed, nothing in Margie's life, or his, would ever be the same. By the time Margie settled into the rhythm of New York's music scene, fate was already working behind the curtain, quiet, deliberate, inevitable. Because while she was learning how to shape her sound in studio rooms and backstage hallways, Ray Charles was carving out his own place in American music. The moment he heard the Cookies, something in her voice cut through the mix like a flare in the night. Ray didn't just listen, he felt her. People who knew him said Ray Charles could sense talent the way other men sense weather. And Margie's voice, it wasn't just strong, it was alive. So when he invited the Cookies to sing with him, it wasn't out of courtesy. It was instinct. The kind that changes careers, and lives. The Cookies walked into rehearsal as a background group. They walked out as the Raelettes. And Margie? She didn't just join the lineup. She redefined it. Ray made her the lead because she had something the others didn't, a rawness that didn't ask permission. She sang like someone who wasn't afraid to hurt, and wasn't afraid to make you feel her hurt too. On stage, she was a fireball, sharp, electric, lit from the inside. The musicians whispered a nickname for her, Henry. Strong. Tough. Tomboyish. Uncompromising. Ray liked that. On tour, Ray and Margie worked hours that tested most singers: harmonies, phrasing, breath control, timing. Ray was a perfectionist, and Margie was the one person stubborn enough to push back when she thought he was wrong. Their arguments became laughter. Laughter became closeness. And soon, closeness crossed a line no one could uncross. Ray Charles was married. But Margie was the woman he couldn't look away from. They kept their affair quiet from the public, but the band felt the electricity. Some nights, you could hear it in the music, Ray hitting the chords harder, Margie leaning into her notes like she had something to prove. And then came the moment that cemented her place in music history. 1958, Newport Jazz Festival. Ray Charles began the opening to "Night Time Is the Right Time." The crowd leaned in. But it wasn't Ray they were waiting for, it was that answering shout, the one that tore the song in half. When Margie stepped up to the mic and screamed, "Baby," the audience jolted like they'd been struck. It wasn't a note. It was a declaration. A wound opening. A storm breaking. People say a great singer can make you feel something. Margie made you feel everything at once. From that night on, no one else could sing that part. Not on stage. Not in the studio. Not even Ray's other women vocalists. That scream belonged to her. And the hits kept coming. What did I say? Drown in my own tears. Hallelujah, I love her so. Then the song that rolled across America like a wave. Hit the Road Jack. #1 on the R&B charts. #1 on the Hot 100. Grammy win. Ray wrote the music, but the electricity in that recording, the sharp, stinging replies, came from Margie and the Raelettes. Audiences loved the sass, the bite, the back-and-forth drama. But off-stage, the drama was real. Because Margie was no longer just Ray's lead singer. She was carrying Ray's child. He helped her arrange the birth quietly in New York, promising support, promising stability, promising whatever he could without unraveling the life he already had. Their son, Charles Wayne, was born in the fall of 1959. A secret the world wouldn't know for years. Margie came back to the road too quickly, because she had to. Money wasn't steady, and other labels were circling, whispering dreams of solo careers. But Ray still needed her voice, needed her fire, even as he drifted toward new women, new temptations, new shadows. Margie felt the shift immediately. Her voice was still the thunder in Ray's storm. But she could feel the clouds moving. And the thing about a woman like Margie, a woman who sings from her wounds, is that when she feels left behind, the world feels it too. That was the beginning of the unraveling. But not the end of her brilliance. Not yet. Success can be loud, but the beginning of the end is often quiet, just a shift in the air, a feeling you can't quite name. For Margie Hendricks, that shift came when she realized Ray Charles wasn't hers. Not fully. Not ever. Ray loved her fire, her talent, her strength. But Ray also loved movement, new faces, new voices, new escapes from the weight he carried inside. And Margie felt each distance like a bruise. The woman who could shake a concert hall with her voice now found herself trembling in private, afraid of the silence between her and Ray. On the road, the changes were small at first. Ray stayed out later. He laughed with other women. He rehearsed with different singers. And though he still reached for Margie on stage, off-stage she could feel herself slipping from the center of his world. That kind of pain doesn't just sit quietly, it grows teeth. Margie started drinking to soften the sharp edges. A little at night, then before soundcheck, then before hitting the stage. The alcohol mixed dangerously with the heroin she and Ray used to share behind closed doors. He said he didn't lead her into addiction, and maybe that's true, but they certainly walked deep into it together. Now, though, Ray was steadying himself, turning toward discipline and control. Margie was moving the other way. The band felt her anger before she admitted it. She snapped during rehearsals, argued with backup singers, challenged Ray during arrangements. And Ray Charles, perfectionist, bandleader, a man who lived by strict musical order, did not tolerate chaos. But Margie wasn't trying to break rules. She was breaking from heartbreak. The final straw came wrapped in jealousy. Ray could be unfaithful, but he expected obedience. No one in the band was allowed to touch Ray's girls, even if he no longer wanted them. But Margie, tired of begging a man who didn't belong to her, let herself fall into the arms of one of Ray's trumpet players. It wasn't love, it was escape. And when Ray found out, the anger was instant. Cold. Final. The next words he said to her weren't musical direction. They were dismissal. "You're done here. Just like that, 6 years of music, love, touring, and shared addiction ended. Margie left the Raelettes not with applause but with the sound of a door closing. At first, she tried to stand tall. Mercury Records offered her a deal, a chance to prove she didn't need Ray. In 1965 she stepped into the studio alone, her voice still powerful but carrying a weariness that hadn't been there before. She released Now the Hurt's on You and Baby, songs full of heartbreak, but the public didn't hear them. Without Ray Charles, the spotlight didn't follow. Still, she kept fighting. In 1967 she recorded Restless, Nothing But and One Room Paradise, hoping for the hit that would restart her life. But the music world had already shifted. The British invasion was growing, soul was evolving, and Margie, once a rising star, felt herself sinking beneath the noise. Then came the accident. Driving through Texas with her husband Robert Forsing, their car was struck by a lumber truck. Margie survived, but the injuries to her neck and the partial loss of hearing in her right ear changed everything. A singer can take heartbreak, addiction, betrayal, but losing the ability to hear clearly feels like losing part of the soul. She couldn't tour. She couldn't record. She couldn't make the money she needed to support herself or her son. The world that once opened its arms to her now pressed down on her chest until even breathing felt heavy. And Margie turned to the one thing that dulled the ache, heroin. Friends said she tried to quit. That she talked about rebuilding. That she wanted to reclaim the fierce young woman she once was. But addiction doesn't loosen its grip easily, especially when loneliness is feeding it. Years passed, and Margie, once the storm in Ray Charles's music, became a whisper on the edge of the industry. Her voice faded from the radio, her name from contracts, her presence from the rooms where she once ruled. By the summer of 1973, she was a shadow of the woman who once shook the Newport Jazz Festival. On July 14, alone and unseen, Margie Hendrix died from a heroin overdose. 38 years old. A voice like a lightning strike, gone long before the world understood what it had lost. And somewhere out there, Ray Charles, man of music, man of flaws, continued rising to legend status, carrying a silence inside him that even fame could not fill. People say he mourned her in his own way. Quietly. Deeply. The way only a man who loved but could not stay can mourn. Margie's fall wasn't a single moment. It was a slow unraveling, fueled by love, pride, addiction, and the weight of being extraordinary in a world that asked too much of her. Her story doesn't end here. But this is where the sky went dark. In America, music is more than sound, it is memory. It is history carried through generations, stitched into church pews, kitchen radios, road trips, and long nights when a voice is the only thing keeping you standing. And in that tapestry of American sound, Margie Hendrix is woven deeper than most people realize. While Ray Charles became a national treasure, winning Grammys, breaking racial barriers, reshaping gospel and blues into something the world had never heard, Margie was the spark inside many of his greatest moments. Her voice was the grit beneath the shine, the fire beneath the melody, the soul inside the rhythm. When Americans think of that wild call and response in night time is the right time, they hear her. When they smile at the bite in Hit the Road Jack, they're smiling at her thunder. Even if the world didn't see her face, it felt her presence. To the black community, especially those who lived through the 50s and 60s, Margie represented something powerful, a woman who refused to shrink. At a time when black women were told to stay quiet, she sang louder. At a time when the industry used and discarded talent, she demanded space, even when it cost her. People remember her not just for the tragedy but for the courage it took to stand beside a giant and still insist on being seen. And though America never gave her the flowers she deserved in life, the legacy of her voice continued to echo, through Ray's recordings, through the evolution of soul music, through the women who came after her. Singers like Aretha Franklin, Gladys Knight, and Etta James carried pieces of Margie's fire in their own artistry, whether they knew her story or not. When Hollywood released Ray in 2004, a new generation finally learned her name. Regina King brought Margie's spirit back to life on screen, sharp, vulnerable, unforgettable. And audiences across the country felt something they couldn't quite explain: recognition. As if a missing page in American music history had finally been put back where it belonged. Margie Hendrix may not have lived long enough to witness her impact. But America did. And America still does. There are voices that fade when their time has passed, and then there are voices that leave a mark, etched into the bones of a nation. Margie Hendrix belonged to the second kind. Even after the spotlight slipped away from her, even after the applause went quiet, her sound remained. It lived in the grooves of Ray Charles's greatest records. It lived in the memory of every stage she ever walked across. It lived in the people who heard her once and never forgot how she made them feel. Her life was short, yes. Messy, painful, unfair at times. But brilliance is rarely neat. And Margie's brilliance was the kind that burned, hot, bright, and honest. She gave everything she had to music, even when she had little left to give herself. And though her story ended too soon, her echo didn't. Every time Night Time Is the Right Time plays on an old radio. Every time a young singer tries to unleash a note that sounds like truth. Every time someone remembers that great art often comes from great struggle. Margie is still here. Her son, Charles Wayne, carried her legacy into adulthood. Ray Charles went on to become an American icon, but even he knew that part of his rise, part of the sound people loved him for, came from a woman who refused to sing small. So maybe the question isn't why Margie's life ended early. Maybe the real question is how someone who lived only 38 years left behind something that still sings 50 years later. And that's the gift she leaves us. A reminder that even the most fragile lives can hold extraordinary power. A reminder that talent can shine through pain. A reminder that every voice, no matter how quickly it is silenced, deserves to be heard. If this story reminded you of someone whose light burned bright, even in the dark, feel free to share their name below. And if you'd like to hear more stories of artists who shaped our world in ways time tried to forget, stay with us. There are many more voices waiting to be heard.